The tundra biome is defined as a region comprising of a low variety of plants and animals, limited food sources, minimal precipitation, brief growing seasons, and exceedingly cold temperatures. It is known for its frost-molded landscapes. The tundra is the coldest and driest of all the biomes. Despite these extreme conditions, the tundra is home to several unique species of plants and animals. There are two types of tundra, the alpine tundra and the Arctic tundra. On this episode of National Geographic, we'll be focusing on the Arctic tundra.
The tundra has extremely cold temperatures, but it can get warm in the summer. The winters are long, dark, and cold with temperatures below 0 degrees for 6 to 10 months. The Arctic tundra gets so cold that there are layers of permafrost, which is a permanently frozen layer of subsoil. The average summer temperature ranges from 3 to 12 degrees Celsius. This enables the tundra biomes to sustain life. The summers are short and only give plants about 50 to 60 days to grow each year. The tundra has exceedingly strong winds and 6 to 10 inches of precipitation per year. These abiotic factors affect the ecosystem because they dictate if forms of life and vegetation can survive in the tundra. The extreme conditions limit the number of species that can successfully survive. These animals that do survive compete in predation and competition. Here are two examples of the climatographs. The rainfall is shown by blue bar graphs and the temperature is shown by the red line graph. This climatograph is based on Iqaluit Nunavut. In this climatograph, the least amount of rainfall falls in February with an average of 19 millimeters, and the greatest amount of rainfall occurs in August with an average of 62 millimeters. The temperatures are the lowest in February with an average of negative 27 degrees Celsius, and the temperatures are the highest in July with an average of 7 degrees Celsius. The second climatograph is based off data collected from Inuvik, which is a town located in the Northwest Territories of Canada. In this climatograph, the least amount of rainfall falls in March with an average of 10 millimeters, and the greatest amount of rainfall occurs in August with an average of 41 millimeters. The temperatures are lowest in January with an average of negative 28.2 degrees Celsius, while the temperatures are highest in July with an average of 13.5 degrees Celsius.
The tundra's water cycle is in fact quite simple. Even though most people expect that there's a lot of snow in the tundra, it actually receives very little precipitation, be it rain or snow. Because of the cold, very little of the precipitation that does fall in the tundra reaches the rivers. Instead, it soaks in the ground and then freezes, forming what is known as permafrost. The few plants that grow in the tundra absorb this water and then transpire it back into the air, where it rises to the clouds. Water from the plants that are eaten are transferred to the organism that ate them. The water that does melt runs down a river. The river may be drank by a tundra animal and then evaporated into the air, or it may float into the ocean, where it may evaporate, become a cloud, and then restart the process. Is used by snow and ice in the tundra. The snow is formed in the atmosphere, which is 79% nitrogen. This means that snow can absorb a significant amount of nitrogen. Permafrost in the tundra affects the cycle when nitrogen from dead animals or their waste becomes trapped in the permafrost.
Many animals here in the tundra have adapted to the cold conditions, and their physical features are proof of that. Polar bears have long, stiff hair in between their feet that protects their feet from the cold and also provides them with traction. They also have hollow fur, which traps air inside, thus making the bear buoyant. They have a thick layer of fat, which keeps them warm in the winters, and this layer could be up to 11 centimeters thick. The skin under their fur is black, which helps with heat retention. Lastly, they have white fur, which helps them with camouflage. Caribou are another good example of an Arctic animal that has adapted to its environment. They have 2 layers of fur to help them with the cold, and they also have the behavioral adaptation of migrating to escape the worst of the winter cold. The caribou have compact and stocky bodies with short tails and short ears to avoid losing body heat, and their legs have veins and arteries that run side by side so that the heat of the arterial blood coming from the body warms the cooler venous blood returning from the lower legs. Arctic foxes have short and round ears that are heavily furred. This limits the escape of body heat from the fox, and it helps it protect it from the cold. Their coat also changes color throughout the year. In the summer, the furs are reddish-brown to act as a camouflage, and in the winter, it turns white to blend in with the snow.
There are different types of adaptations plants in the Arctic tundra have evolved to possess, many helping to resist the cold. The pasque flower, for example, is covered in fine silky hairs, providing it with insulation for the cold. Another plant with an adaptation for the cold is the bearberry, which has leathery leaves that protect it from the cold and from the wind. The purple saxifrage exhibits clump distribution in order to protect itself from the cold. This plant grows tightly together in a clump with others of its kind. In this case, the purple saxifrage's clump distribution helps it resist the cold, and it also reduces the damage from wind-blown snow and ice pieces. The struggle among organisms for the same limited resources in an ecosystem is called competition. Two animals that compete in the tundra are the muskox and the caribou. Both eat plants like sedges and grasses. When they fight and compete, it's simply over territory and food. When an Arctic fox is involved in competition, it would most likely be with the red fox due to their significant niche overlap. They compete for things such as den sites and hunting areas. Polar bears generally live alone except for mating, but sometimes they will cross each other's paths, and if they both want the same thing from that area, they will fight for it, sometimes even until death. They will fight over food, dens, for males in the mating season, and sometimes even for females in the mating season as well.
Symbiotic relationships are a special type of interaction between species. These relationships are essential to many organisms and ecosystems. An example of commensalism in the Arctic tundra would be the Arctic fox following the caribou when the caribou digs for lichens. While the caribou feed on lichens, they dig up the soil and slightly expose or bring small underground animals closer to the surface. The fox follows the caribou, finishes digging up those small mammals, and eats them. In this relationship, the caribou is unaffected. A mutually beneficial partnership in the tundra is between tundra swans and sago pondweed, where the swans utilize the pondweed as a source of sustenance during the birds' seasonal movement in exchange for seed dispersal. An example of parasitism in the Arctic tundra could be liver tapeworm cysts and their hosts. Tapeworms feed on the food that is consumed by the hosts, leading to their malnutrition. Predation can be seen in the tundra with Arctic wolves hunting caribou. Caribou try to protect themselves from wolves by sleeping on frozen lakes or swimming in regular ones. Although wolves can swim, the wolves rely on surprise, strategy, and group hunting to compensate for their lack of speed.
Here, one can view a food web with several animals from the Arctic tundra. This web illustrates the flow of energy from organism to organism, with producers such as the purple saxifrage providing energy for animals such as Arctic hares. This example shows how the purple saxifrage is a producer and how Arctic hares are primary consumers. An example of a primary consumer being eaten by a secondary one would be an Arctic hare being eaten by an Arctic fox. An example of a decomposer in this food web is fungi, which decomposes diseased organisms such as an Arctic fox that has passed away. In the Arctic tundra, there are various types of organisms that make up the different levels of the Arctic energy pyramid. At the lowest trophic level, we can view the producers, which consist of flowering plants, low shrubs, sedges, grasses, liverworts, lichens, mosses, and algae. These organisms create the energy for all of the other levels of the pyramid. The level above the primary producers shows the primary consumers. Primary consumers are the organisms that consume producers. These organisms retain 10% of the original energy from producers, as 90% of this energy is lost as heat every time we move up by one trophic level. Secondary consumers are the organisms that eat herbivores, which is another word for primary consumers. This makes secondary consumers carnivorous, as they eat animals. The level above secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, consists of organisms that eat other carnivores. Decomposers gain their energy from dead organisms from all of the different trophic layers.
Density-independent factors occur independently of the density of the population. In the tundra, these factors would include temperature, permafrost, wind, or rain. Because the tundra is the coldest biome, it limits the number of species that can survive here. The permafrost causes the topsoil to become frozen, and this is why the roots of plants are not able to dig deeper into the ground. Wind and rain also affect the tundra and the organisms living in it. The wind blows year-round and at an average of 60 miles per hour, and the tundra receives only 6 to 10 inches of rain annually. Density-dependent factors are influenced by the size of a population. It usually regulates in ecosystems with a high population. Examples of density-dependent factors could be food availability or space. Predation is also a density-dependent factor. Increased prey availability can increase the birth rates of predators, or it could decrease the death rates of predators. Succession is the process by which the structure of a biological community evolves over time. Hypothetically, if the tundra went through primary succession, it would start because of global warming. When the Earth begins to heat due to global warming, it causes the glaciers of the tundra to melt. This leaves behind rocky land with no life. Eventually, pioneer plants such as lichens will begin to form. Decayed lichen and broken down rocks would form the first soil. Moss will also begin to form by taking in moisture from the air, and then that moss will also decay, therefore adding more to the soil. Over time, the soil will become more and more plentiful.
Mining industries, oil, and gas can all have negative impacts on the fragile tundra habitats. Permafrost can be thawed by drilling wells, but heavy vehicles and pipeline construction can damage soil, preventing vegetation from returning. This activity also raises the possibility of toxic spills. Rapid warming in the Arctic is also causing the permafrost to thaw. Permafrost is carbon rich, and melting it releases a surplus of carbon into the air. Methane is also released into the atmosphere as these thawing soils decompose. Permafrost emissions have the potential to significantly contribute to future warming, but the amount of warming depends on how much carbon is released and whether it is released as carbon dioxide or the more powerful greenhouse gas, methane. The nature and rate of these emissions are highly uncertain under future climate conditions.